She was violently taken from her home by North African pirates. Then they sold her into slavery in Africa. After nearly a decade, she was finally able to make her way back home. But when she returned, her own people gave her a nickname that would last for centuries, Tyrkja-Gudda, as if she was only half Icelandic by now, tainted by the world she had been kidnapped by. This is the true and tragic story of Guðríður Símonardóttir. The Westman Islands, or Westman as they say in Icelandic, sit just off the south coast of Iceland. The wind comes at you from every direction at once, and the cliffs drop hard into cold green water. Seabirds nest in the cliff faces by the thousands, and the smell of fish and salt is everywhere. Iceland in the early 1600s was part of the Danish kingdom. Poor, remote, and accustomed to the idea that real danger in life came from nature, not from men. A ruined fishing season was more likely to be the death of you than any enemy army. The things people prepared for were storms, the cold, and hunger. Absolutely nobody in the Westman Islands were preparing for pirates from North Africa. That just sounds crazy. But here's the thing about isolation that people tend to forget. The sea doesn't just separate people and places, it connects them. Ships brought trade, disease, news, and sometimes it brought people who were very far from home, who wanted something from you. And so, in 1627, the world arrived in the Westman Islands in the worst possible way imaginable. Several unknown ships appeared off Heimaey, and on board the ship was North African pirates, and they moved fast. There are accounts of people hiding in caves and cliffs, terrified and silently listening for footsteps. Some made it, but most didn't. Guðríður's husband, a fisherman named Eyjólfur, escaped the raid. She didn't, and neither did their young son. 242 people were taken from Westman Islands that day. And just think about that for a moment. One morning you're living in the only place you have ever known, just waking up with your family, getting ready for a normal day, then suddenly you've been taken and brought aboard a strange ship. Behind you, your island shrinks to a smudge on the horizon until there's nothing left but the open sea. Guðríður didn't know it, but she was heading for Algiers in North Africa. And this is where her story and challenges truly begin. But before we move on to the story, who were these pirates really? Allow me to explain. In Icelandic, the raid of 1627 is called the Turkish Abductions. But the men who came weren't exactly Turkish, at least not in the way we'd use the word today. They were actually Barbary pirates and privateers operating out of North African ports like Algiers and Salé. And they were connected to the broader Ottoman world, but drawn from across the Mediterranean. Some were Moroccan, but some were also European. Men who had converted to Islam and wanted to take part in piracy and looting for different reasons. One of the commanders linked to the raid on Iceland was a Dutchman known as Murat Reis the Younger, and he was born in Haarlem in the Netherlands. So why did they call it the Turkish Abductions? Well, because in early modern Europe, Turk was a general label for the Muslim Ottoman world. And if Barbary pirates sound familiar to some of you, then yes, even though it would be like 200 years later, this same group of people, or pirates, would later be at war with the young United States in what we today call the Barbary Wars. Anyway, back to Algiers, 1627. Algiers at this time was a serious city, a center of the Ottoman Mediterranean world. It was a busy trade hub with trade routes that stretched from West Africa to the Levant. It was nothing like the Westman Islands. So if you'd grown up in an Icelandic fishing village, the noise alone would have been overwhelming. The heat and the unfamiliar sounds of Arabic in every direction, and of course the total absence of anything that felt like home, must have been truly terrifying for the people who had been abducted. Captives taken by these types of raid could be sold as slaves into households or used as forced labor, and also held for ransom, and sometimes all three at the same time. Their fate depended on who bought them and whether the ransom networks back home could locate their names and find out who they were. And of course if they survived the diseases and ordeals they were regularly put through. Guðríður's story is quite vague. She left no diary and so no memories in her own words survive to this day. What we do have are fragments of the picture. Ransom records, accounts from other Icelandic captives that managed to survive, and of course later stories told by different people connected to the story. We can't really see clearly into her daily life in the city, and we don't know exactly what she did or who owned her. But what we do know is that she managed to survive for almost 10 years in the city, trapped in a world that was completely different than the one she was born into. And then, through a slow-moving ransom process that took years, a group of Icelandic captives were finally set free from captivity in 1636, and Guðríður was one of them. But even though she was freed, she couldn't go straight home. And what happened next tells you almost everything you need to know about the world she was returning to. Before the freed hostages were allowed to travel back to Iceland, they were taken to Copenhagen in Denmark for religious instructions. The reasoning, as far as we can guess, was that people who had spent years living under Muslim rule needed to be corrected in Christian doctrine before they could be reintegrated back into society. Guðríður had survived a violent abduction and several years as a captive in another foreign country. She had survived the long journey back north, but now, before people back home would accept her, she had to pass a theological examination. And the man assigned to teach the freed Icelanders was a young theology student named Algiers. And while he was in his early 20s, Guðríður at this time was in her mid-30s. What eventually developed between them isn't described in any detail or in any surviving record. But what we do know for sure is that Guðríður became pregnant. The situation was genuinely complicated. She was, as far as anyone knew, still legally married, and her husband Eyjólfur had escaped the raid and presumably was still alive somewhere on Iceland. Hallgrímur, on the other hand, was supposed to be preparing the captives for their return back home, not impregnate them. And yet, the two returned to Iceland together in 1637, the year after Guðríður was freed. But when they arrived, they learned that Eyjólfur had died in a fishing accident. The exact timing of when they were aware of his death, we simply don't know. And that uncertainty mattered in a society where the rules around marriage and honor were taken very seriously. The two would eventually marry, and Hallgrímur was ordained as pastor at Saurbær in Hvalfjordur. And later in life he wrote the Passion Hymns, which are several devotional poems that has become some of the most beloved religious work in Icelandic history. And his name now marks the concrete cathedral that rises over Reykjavik. And being the wife of Iceland's most revered religious poet might just seem like it would protect Guðríður's reputation. But it didn't. So why did she get the nickname of Tyrkja-Gudda? The Icelandic folklore grew around her in directions that had very little to do with who she actually was. Some people said she was secretly keeping Muslim idols at home, which anyone with even a basic understanding of Islam would recognize as nonsense, since it explicitly prohibits idol worshipping. So in a way, that story wasn't really about Islam, it was about something completely different. It was more about a woman who'd been somewhere she wasn't supposed to be for a very long time, and who therefore couldn't quite be trusted to have come back unchanged. She became a vessel for anxieties that had nothing to do with her, more to do with perhaps the fear of Islam, the fear of women who had been outside the community and returned with experiences that no one else could verify or fully understand. And here's what's particularly striking about this story. She wasn't forgotten. People remembered and still remember her name today. but they've remembered her for the wrong reason, reducing her to the catastrophe that she survived and the rumors that attached themselves to that experience, rather than focusing on what she truly was, a victim. Guðríður died in 1682, outliving the raid by more than 55 years. Guðríður's story is partly about the reach of the early modern world and how far violence could travel, but it's also about something more specific than that. It's about what happens when a person survives everything thrown at them, return home, and find out that survival just wasn't enough. The community, which was supposed to receive her as a victim, saw her more as a symbol of everything they feared. So in this sense, we can almost say that she was taken twice. Once by the pirates on that summer morning in 1627, and once by the story other people told about her for the next 300 years. What she deserves, or what we at least can try to give her today, is to be seen as the person she actually was. Not Tyrkja-Gudda, not a symbol of fear and xenophobia, but as a woman from a small island off the coast of Iceland who crossed a world she hadn't chosen, survived it, and came back. And that's enough. That's more than enough.